Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We welcome you here to the third race of the season, season 52 of the RTG Talladega Challenge. Getting ready to go racing for another 66 laps. I'm Seth Cole alongside of Zach Freeman. But Zach, I think the big top story coming into this race was the fallout from last week. The big wreck that took out all but about 4 cars on the final lap. We heard from Race Directory that the standings were unofficial. We finally know at the end of this week, Tim Nofsker, who did cross the line, the winner of that race, did not officially take that checkered flag. Thusly, he gets EOL'd. And Billy Elliott, who we saw point his way into the playoffs last year, he's locked in through a win this season.
Thank you, Seth. Good evening, race fans. Yes, Seth, as you mentioned, many stories to cover here tonight. Tim Nofsker with the heartbreaker at the end. Many of you may remember the incident coming off of turn number 4 on the final lap where the leaders bunched themselves up just a little bit. A couple cars went down below the yellow line. A couple cars came up. Long story short, as Seth mentioned, all but 4 cars being involved in a major wreck. Nofsker would finish first, however, would have that rescinded in favor of Billy Elliott. So we saw last year, Seth, as you mentioned, Billy Elliott, he did point his way into the playoff system, but if you remember, it was also not without a lot of hard work and perseverance through even the first round of the playoffs before he would advance from that eventually as well. So he's got a little bit more comfort. That one of those victories that everybody wants to get out there and get to lock themselves into the playoffs. Billy Elliott is sitting pretty right now at this point. I know the use of a word twice, but that's exactly what it is, Seth.
And as we look at the point standings here coming into this race, Billy Elliott, along with our season opening winner, Josh Metallic, their numbers highlighted in yellow, they claim 2 of the 10 positions, with Chris Elliott, the most consistent driver that hasn't won yet. He's currently leading the point standings, and there's some names up here that we didn't see in the playoffs last season, like Elliott, Hank Middleton, Bobby Farrell's up there as well. So we're getting some new players here a season later.
Some new names, some new numbers, some new players, as you put it, Seth. But yes, this is one of those things that we've been covering week in and week out since about the halfway point of last season as well. Some of these bigger names who we see sitting up front on the front row when the race starts and bringing home a lot of victories, you know, those grounds are now being contested by the likes of the names that you just mentioned. Guys are starting to get a little smarter out there on the racetrack, being a little bit more patient and having some good luck to bring them through and get them some solid finishes. Now, we just spoke to Chris Elliott a couple weeks ago, and Chris was saying, you know, he's been working really hard on his program. He knows that a lot of these guys out here are really good at what they do. So, you know, he's just been working away at it one at a time, and he finds himself sitting on that front number 1 spot in the points. So there's a lot of shaking and moving happening right now.
Drivers are about to get ready to grid up here for the third race of the season. In the season opener, we saw Chuck McClure doing the driving duties of the number 28 machine. Last week, it was Tim Nofsker who ended up, we thought, winning in that car. Of course, we already mentioned the fallout from that. But here tonight, doing the driving duties back in that very familiar Motorcraft Ford, is Mark Paglia, and he is our pre-race interview here this evening. Hey, Mark, it's Zach and Seth up here in the Flatout Racing Network studios. You got us?
Yeah, can you hear me, sir?
We definitely can. Great to see you back behind the wheel of that number 28 machine. But first things first, Mark, we've already documented everything that's been going on with you and your wife in the last couple of weeks. How are you doing here tonight?
We're doing really well. The wife had tests yesterday, talked to her oncologist this morning. Everything is clean and green, and we're ready to go. And I just can't say enough about everybody at RTG, man. They've just been awesome. You know, I replayed that video last week and had her in tears with all the good things people were saying.
Well, I mean, man, we ended up seeing the 28, we thought, win the race last week. That was with Nofsker doing the substitution for you. Here tonight, though, how do you shift gears to try and see if you can put that car in victory lane?
Well, right now I'm going to start in the back. I didn't qualify. I'm just going to try to, you know, get back in the flow of things and see if I can work up my way up through without getting any wrecks. That's the key.
Hey, Mark, it's Zach up here in the booth. It's great to talk to you. It's great to hear from you. It's great to hear that things are going a lot better, man. You've had a lot of talent behind the wheel of that 28 car, but we also know that you've got quite a bit of talent yourself. What are you thinking about tonight? How are you feeling getting back into it?
Well, just during warm-up, I was a little bit nervous that I was going to, try to qualify well and get up in front, and I thought better of it. And I said, I'm going to start in the back and just, try to get the flow of it again. You lay almost a month off, you just lose a little bit of that comfortable feeling behind the wheel. So I'm going to get in the back and just let things come to me, and I'm not going to try to force it.
Well, we know you were strong last season, almost pulled off a couple of victories there, Mark. Great to see you once again back in that race car here tonight. Best of luck to you. Go get him.
Appreciate it. And Zach and Seth, thanks for all the well wishes. Again, that really meant a lot to us.
That's Mark Paglia, as he stated, did not put down a qualifying lap, so he'll start towards the back. Bob Seminara is going to get his first pole of the season, as he'll be alongside of the driver who had the pole the last 2 weeks, Joe DeSpirito. Chuck McClure and Donnie Garrett in row 2, Grant Wesley and Jessica Shelton row 3, Josh Metallic, Bernie Mobbs, Bob Dixon, and Rodney Sullivan will complete the top 10. There's Jeremy Jeffries and Tim Nofsker in row 6. Billy Elliser, last week's winner, will be 13th, with the top 15 being completed by Jeff Crivello and John Godfrey. Then it's going to be Chris Emery, David Cannon, Jerm Lewis, Richard Martin, and Glenn Harris, the top 20. Rest of the drivers that took time: 21st, Dave Melson, Wiley Coat in 22nd, 23rd, Perry Bond, Manny D will be in 24th, with Bobby Farrell in 25th, as we are underway here, race number 3 at Talladega.
Another big field here tonight, Seth. I think we tipped the scale at somewhere right around 36 or 37 cars. So these guys out in full force, as we're used to seeing. Week number 3, another good crowd. Leading them off on turn number 2 is currently Bob Seminara, but it looks like Chuck McClure has got a bit of a peak down on the bottom, heading off into turn number 3.
He's got Grant Wesley and Josh Metallic down there helping him. Right now, 4 cars against 3. Then you start to have a little bit of a gap back to Bernie Mobbs and Bob Dixon, and a battle for what would be the 8th position. Now they start closing up to the rows ahead of them.
Yeah, these guys all being very patient at this point. You see them side by side by side by side. If you didn't know it, you'd think they were just pacing the field at about 190 miles an hour here out of the trial, though. Seminara still now with the advantage. They're going to push ahead by about a car in that middle line over the low line heading into 1 and 2.
Seminara still with that little edge, as you said, but we're going to see if maybe that inside line can gain a few more numbers. Still, that gap there from Josh Metallic back to Bob Dixon might be hurting that inside line. You can clearly see down the back straightaway, that middle groove, technically the outside line here with the side-by-side racing. Top 2, maybe 3 might be clear going into the third corner.
Yep, Chuck McClure now down to the inside of the track. He's got about half a car to the inside of the 77 of Donnie Garrett, but it's not going to be enough. Jessica Shelton now looks to make the move on the outside of McClure, so that middle line early on looks to be the place to be. It's something that we're not strangers to seeing here at Talladega.
Bob Seminara coming into this race, currently finding himself in rather an unfamiliar spot for what we've seen out of him in the last 2 seasons. Right now, 9th in point standings. We're used to seeing him up inside of our top 3, top 4, top 5 in the point standings. So it's been a little bit of a, I guess we could say, slow start for the 712 machine. He was one of the drivers that ended up suffering a rather dismal finish last week, getting swept up in that last race incident. He was running at the time inside of the top 5, but that was not where he finished.
No, and that's been a big thing here for Bob. Those races that have gone wrong for him have gone wrong in big ways. The ones that he's been able to bounce back from, he's been able to do in convincing fashion and finish well, but the other ones he just can't quite recover from, and that's been what's hurt him. But today, not looking to be the case so much. So now you've got 5 cars in that middle line before you get to your first side-by-side. Chuck McClure is still stuck on the inside of the racetrack. It looks like the car outside of him, who is now currently riding behind the number 90 of Bernie Mobbs, is going to be that number 38 of Rodney Sullivan, who's putting on another good showing here this week.
Yeah, Rodney Sullivan last week gained 8 spots in the standings, moved from 24th up to 16th after last week's last lap fiascos, and now trying to see if he can crack his way into the top 10. He's got Grant Wesley right behind him. You mentioned the fact about tipping the scales here tonight. 37 cars took the green in the first race, 36 last week, and 37 again here tonight. We had 3 cautions in race 1, 6 cautions in race 2, so it's kind of a question of Which side of the scales are we going to be in terms of the caution count here tonight? Who knows? Maybe we'll go green all the way to the end. We saw that quite a bit last season.
Yes, it is completely possible. Now, I know 6 caution flags sounds like a lot of caution flags, but when you take into consider the styles of incidents we had a couple that were just normal, super speedway sort of incidents on the racetrack, big ones, but we did have another couple incidents that were in relation to warp and lag issues out on the racetrack, as well as another incident as a result of one car blowing up, which is highly unusual in this series. The setups that they run here are usually very stable, doesn't fluctuate too much in temperature range, so you don't usually have to worry about cooling down the motor or overheating it and blowing up. So as long as these guys can keep their noses out of trouble, I don't think that they'll have any issues making it to the first round of pit stops. And again, Seth, this was one of your points to the race last week, surviving to pit.
Yep, absolutely. Looking here at a couple of drivers that are sporting some new paint schemes, and I'm so used to seeing that blue number 8 Doritos sponsored machine, but Jeremy Jeffries is that white and green car, third on the inside line with a new sponsorship this week. So that's going to take a little bit of getting used to.
Yeah, it might take a little bit for us, but it is a very sharp green race car. Those cars still stuck on that bottom line. There's only the 4 of them when the Clure Metallic, Jeremy Jeffries, and the 26 of Billy Ellis are last week's victor before you get to another couple car lengths back to Jeff Crivello and John Godfrey riding on that inside line. So right now that middle line still bunched up nose to tail, really how they should be, and they've got quite a bit of numbers, almost 3 times the amount of cars, drafting together, which that inside line just isn't doing right now. So it's not anything unusual to see that inside line not quite up to snuff as what that middle line is, but when you can get an equal number of cars side by side there, it usually works out a little better. But for now, those 3 cars just kind of stuck down there with Grant Wesley passing by the 17 of McClure on the outside into 3.
Bit of a scary moment up inside of the top 5 last lap as 5th place Bernie Mobbs had a little bit of side to side. Fortunately, he is clear on that outside line in the 5th position, so nobody was really affected by it. It did kind of back up the rows behind him just a little bit, allowing him the time to have that settle out. As right now make it the top 6 with Rodney Sullivan's clear. You've got a 6-car train in that middle line. Seminara, Despirito, Donnie Garrett, Jessica Shelton, Bernie Mobbs, and Rodney Sullins. Might be 7 cars here momentarily as Grant Wesley trying to get clear around the 17.
Yeah, and again, down on that inside line, it looks like the 26 of Elliser just isn't quite getting up to the back bumper of Jeremy Jeffries. And Jeff Crivello is hanging almost an entire car length off the back of the 26 car. So I would say at this point, I would guess that middle line's probably got a 3 or 4 mile an hour advantage heading off into that corner. And when you just can't maintain that momentum on the bottom of that, you see they're now falling back to around the 9th place. Bob Dixon now working around the 17 of the trioval.
We got a third line starting to form. Jerm Lewis, Dave Melson, they were up there for a couple of laps trying to make something happen. Then it settled back down to them running the middle line. Now Wiley Coate along with Melson and Richard Martin. They're trying to see if they can get the third line going.
Yep, but again, they've got another car length back to the next car behind them. So if they really want to make that top line move, they're going to need a couple more cars than that, because that middle line being absolutely dominated right now. The first 4 cars, Seminara, Despirito, Garrett, and Shelton, are nose to tail all the way down the backstretch. So they're making a lot of speed. It looks like the number 90 car was running in 5th of Bernie Mobbs, not even quite getting up to the rear end of Shelton either, even though he's got some help in the form of the 38 of Rodney Sullins.
And that might be partially to the warp that he was experiencing earlier. Might be a little nervous getting right up on the back bumper, because we know that if you're too close to somebody's rear bumper and start that side-to-side, bumper grab could come into play, as our 2 race winners are down on the inside line of Josh Metallic and Billy Elliser. Now, we both know, Zach, that if a wreck takes place, you have a better chance usually of avoiding it if you're down that inside line, because you not only have the inside line, but also that apron available to you to try and avoid. Is that why the 2 of them are down here this early on for the moment, to try and see if they can preserve their race cars, try and be the first multi-time winner this season? Or is it the fact that since they've got a win in the bank, they're like, hey, let's try something. Let's see if we can get the inside line going here?
Actually, I'm going to be completely honest with you here, Seth. I don't think it's either one of those options. They haven't had any opportunity with the way that middle line is formed up to move up the racetrack at all. So I really think that they're just kind of stuck down there right now. I think if they could make any progress or could get out of that line, I think it would make a big difference and they would try to do it. But again, with as stout as that middle line has been, there's been very little opening between race cars, and we see cars behind them jumping up into that middle line. I think the leaders of that pack right now, being McClure, Metallic, and Jeffries, are just kind of stuck there at the moment.
They might have a gap open up for them momentarily here. See some space from Tim Nofsker, now back in the 088, back to that black 222 of Chris Emery, but now looks like that gap is starting to close up. So again, they'll be pinned to the inside line. Grant Wesley, on the other hand, though, he's actually going to switch from the top to the bottom and try and lead that inside line. And we saw Grant do this last week as well. He was holding a nice spot up inside of the top 5 at the time, I think it was. He saw the inside line, needed some help, and he was willing to jump down there and try and add to the numbers.
Yeah, but we just saw exactly almost the same exact thing has happened to him last week. He had such a jump on that inside line. He had about a car length and a half on the 17 and McClure behind him. But by the time McClure and company caught up to the back end of Wesley, Wesley was going slower than they were, and they weren't even out of turn number 2 yet, which caused them to check up just a little bit. However, where they made up that ground is where the 39 and 17 got hard into the back of the 88 down the backstretch. And now you see Wesley challenging to the inside of Jessica Shelton in the 94.
Interesting that we have the 88 and the 17 lined up nose to tail there, because that's the way they were coming off of turn 4 on the final lap. Wesley leading Chuck McClure. A little bit of contact happened between the two of them, and then obviously the 17 got hooked into the 88, and neither one of them ended up winning the race. But right now, putting that aside, putting that out of their head, trying to work together here on that bottom line, and they're making some progress. They're about to crack the top 5.
Yep, but it's something interesting just to pay attention to here in case nobody noticed it. I'm not sure if it was the 712 or the 24 up front that had some side-to-side warp going on, but the number 88 of Grant Wesley seems to have that same issue. So, Seth, what's interesting about that is now you have the cars that are respectively leading each line. How do you get comfortable enough with even just that little amount of side-to-side happening in the corners to really get up there and give a shove without risking taking out, the majority of the field here?
You really can't. Even a little side-to-side, as we're starting to see a little bit more there. I think that's the 24 that's side-to-siding. The one that you saw earlier, I think, was the 712. A lot of drivers seem to be having that issue right now. And, yeah, it's just so difficult because it's hard enough with the way that these cars are moving down the back straightaway to line up the bumper perfectly. But when you've got even a slight little bit of side-to-side, that is really going to affect you with trying to line up the bumpers. And, of course, with bumper grab, if it happens up here at the front, there's no telling how many cars are going to get swept up in it that are in mid to the rear of the field.
Absolutely. Well, we saw that coming off turn 4 for the checkered flag last week. That's exactly what happened. There was a little bit of bumper grab as a result of one of the cars changing lanes ahead of them, and it took out all but 4 or 5 cars on the field. So that's another very real possibility, Seth. We're now working lap 15. I would say we're only 4 or 5 laps away from green flag stops, and I have a feeling by the way the field looks at this point, heading off of turn number 2, everybody's pretty cool, calm, and collected. We're probably going to see green flag stops here in just a matter of a few laps.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that's why we saw the top 4 from Seminary to Shelton jump down to that inside line. Make sure they weren't going to get caught up there on the top, so that way they have a clear lane to pit road should they choose to come to pit road in these next couple of laps. The driver that it really hurt was the 90 of Bernie Mobbs. He was still stuck on the outside line. He's going to tuck in, looks like around the 10th position behind Tim Nofsker, leaving them side by side for 11th place on back with Jeff Crivello, Rodney Sullivan, Dave Cannon, Bob Dixon, and others.
Yeah, Rodney Sullivan's another car, like you mentioned, with Bernie Mobbs, who took a huge hit when that entire line moved to the inside. We saw Sullivan's running in the top 6 here, and now he's battling to just stay in the top 15 as he's the first side-by-side with Dave Cannon. Saw a car touch the apron just a little bit and save it. I'm not sure if that was the 92 or the 2 of Hank Middleton, but everything looks pretty cleared up now at this point. Now up front, Metallic now making a run at that middle line with the help of 8 of Jeremy Jeffries.
We see drivers come to pit road on 1, 2, and 3 separate laps. I'm going to assume that Metallic and Jeffries are probably going to be a group of drivers that will come down maybe on the second or third lap because they choose to jump to the outside, see what they can do, giving up that inside line that they currently had. So I think that right now they're going to be planning to stay out an extra lap ahead of these drivers that are currently running ahead of them position-wise.
Yep, but they are losing just a little bit of time on that top line. They are the only two cars in that middle line. They've got no help behind them. That bottom line does seem to be bunched up and moving much better, so I'm not sure if this will pay off in the long run or if that time lost out on the racetrack could translate to time lost once they resume the race after the green flag pit stops. Oh, trouble in 3 and 4, 5 cars involved. Another sliding down the track. It looked like it may have been the 84 car.
54 of Robbie Nice. I think that was Glenn Harris I saw there in the 08 against the inside wall.
The 84 of Dante Ricky was indeed involved. I saw he took a hard hit to the outside wall. Not sure what started it off, but when it caught the corner of my eye, there was already 2 cars spinning up and shooting up across the racetrack. I think this to be about a 5-car incident as they were coming off to take lap 18 on the board. So green flag pit stops now out the window.
Yeah, I wasn't going to say anything for fear I might jinx it, because in the first 2 races this season, these drivers have yet to make it from the start of the race to that first round of green flag pit stops. But maybe I should have said something, because apparently we're going to go 3 for 3 where these drivers will not be making their first round of green flag pit stops around the projected laps that we have, about 18 to 20.
Yep, and I'm looking at that 84 of Dante Ricky car. It is still running out there on the racetrack. The nose looks okay, but the sides of that race car, both left and right, are completely used up. I can't tell if there's any surmountable damage on the rear end of the car, but Dante Ricky, another previous winner and championship contender, in trouble here earlier in the race. This is not going to be good for his points after missing 1 race and not doing too well last week.
Yeah, last week he ended up finishing, I believe it was second officially to Billy Elliser. He's one of the few that made it through the wreck. But to your point, that was coming off what was considered a dead last finish in the season opener, since he qualified for the race but did not make the grid. And we'll take a look here at what happened with Dante Ricky, and just a whole lot of stack up there that I think started really with Dave Melson, back to Richard Martin, back to John Godfrey, and 4th car in line, Dante Ricky, was the one that got the worst of it.
Yeah, and like we were talking about, just a couple really hard hits. I don't know if that damage is insurmountable. I think they can come back from it. But Mark Paglia in the 28, he wrecked that car about 3 times in the middle of that mess and still made it out straight at the tail end of the field. So I saw him make contact with a couple cars as that was all going down. But it looks at this point like he's going to be okay. The other cars involved, can't say the same for them.
Like officially it was Dante Ricky, Glenn Harris, Robbie Nices, Mike Rogers, and Wiley Coate that got bits and pieces of that wreck, some of them more so than others, but at least 5 drivers collected up in this one over in turn 4 for our first caution of the day. Looks like Cy Jones is going to stay out and lead a lap here, but Bob Seminara, his team, first on, first off of pit road. We know how important that number 1 pit stall is, and looks like that was proved again right here.
Absolutely. Joe DeSpirito has shown the importance of that P1 pit stall week after week after week. But anytime Bob Seminara, who is usually the one that's able to knock Joe off that pole position, can take advantage of that first pit stall, we see the same thing in him. So, you just drop it down into first gear, hope you can get it to, about a medium range RPM and just get it enough across that line. You can try to push your pit stall just a little bit and push it forward, but you don't want to overshoot and have to put it in reverse and lose a lot of time. So these guys making a mastery of the art form of starting on the pole position. I would say Joe DeSpirito now, again, this is something that we harp on every single week, has owned about 90% of the pole positions over the last season and a half. So this Florida gang, no strangers to starting up in the top 3 and top 4, and it's no surprise they run just as well together out on the racetrack.
Yeah, Joe DeSpirito, last season, I think there was only 1 finish that he had outside of the top 10, He did finish second in the season opener, but he was another driver that got caught up in the last lap wreck, finished 18th last week. So, it's really, really odd to say when we look at the top of the point standings and we don't see any of, as you mentioned, the Florida gang up there. But we know this is just going to be a matter of time. I mean, we're only into our third race after today. There's still 7 more races for these drivers to either win or point their way into the playoffs. So still a lot of time for drivers that even had 2 bad runs to start out the season to be able to recover.
Well, and it's something that we didn't see so much last year because it seemed like our top 10 in points or so were pretty consistent of being the top 10 drivers most weeks, or at least a majority of them throughout the season. However, through the first 3 weeks this season, we've seen completely different. We've seen guys run highs. We've seen them be caught involved in incidents or, anything like that. So it hasn't been that sort of uniform sort of top 10 finishing that we saw last season, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing because it also lends itself to more entertainment out there on the racetrack.
Robbie Nices in the 54 is now going to be the new race leader here. Not sure if you're having it on your end or not, Zach. Looks like there might be some possible server issues that might be going on over here on this end. I'm not 100% certain, but we have seen some cars warping, so I'm not sure.
Yep, I have seen some cars warping myself. However, nothing too severe or out of the ordinary. Just sort of the minor back and forth sort of stuff that we were talking earlier in the broadcast while they were running side by side. So, everything's looking okay on this end, Seth. So, not really sure what that might be at this point.
All right, well, we still have some time before we end up going green. Lights are still on the pace car, so I'm actually going to take the opportunity right now to see if we can get that fixed. So you're currently going to just see the making adjustments screen up, and we will try and get this thing back to running shape here. But while we're waiting, looks like Robbie Nices has come down pit road. So, these drivers, I'm trying to remember in the first 2 races, I think there's only been one race where these drivers have had to make only one green flag pit stop, and that was, of course, in the closing stages of the season opener.
Yeah, that was the closing stages. And again, that is something that happens. I wouldn't say once in a blue moon. It can be rare at times, but these guys are, pretty good about being able to make it there when they can, but you can never rule out the possibility of a super speedway acting as a super speedway does and ending up with some trouble, just because of the style of the racing and how everybody has to stay in such close quarters at all time, especially if you want to remain competitive and up to speed out here. Again, it's all about momentum. It's all about, maintaining your position and taking advantage and losing as little speed as possible. Now, we often stress that momentum thing because that's just it, Seth. And we've seen it happen multiple times. If you dump out of the gas and lose just, even a couple miles per hour, how much that really stacks up and accordions the field behind you. And if there's nobody behind you to accordion, even about a half a second, if you're not careful, could lead you to losing that lead draft. So you've really got to do your best to maintain that speed, maintain that momentum, and scrub as little speed as possible. So I think that's something that a lot of guys out here, they're really good at. We see the experience level of all these veterans and all these guys that run here week after week. And when you can do that, you can usually guarantee yourself a pretty solid finish at the end of the day.
Looks like we are good to go here, and we're getting ready to be going green, as this would have been around the time that drivers would have probably been all spread out after a round of green flag pit stops. They're all nose to tail here for a restart that's going to take place with 43 laps to go. Bob Seminara has led 18 of the 21 laps so far. Joe DeSpirito to his outside, then it's Donnie Garrett, Chuck McClure, and Grant Wesley, the top 5. Tim Nofsker will be 6th, Josh Metallic 7th, then Jeremy Jeffries, Bernie Mobbs, and Bobby Farrell will be the top 10. Currently, all 36 drivers that took the green to start this race still running, still on the lead lap. And we're ready to
we've
go
got
again.
Big trouble in the middle of the tri-oval. 4, 5, 6 cars involved, 2 down into the grass, 1 up into the wall. No yellow flag at this point. It looks like we are going green. That happened about the 3/4 mark of the pack. Not sure if somebody checked up or exactly what happened, but Bob Seminara out with a huge advantage down into turn number 1. I'm not sure what happened to Joe DeSpirito as Donnie Garrett has slid up in front of him as well off turn 2.
Might have been that they were possibly planning on doing the what Joey Logano would coin the okie dokie. You get a run, I'll let you in, and then tuck up in front of you. Donnie Garrett actually might have been part of that plan as well, because if I recall last week, Donnie Garrett was up here with the 712 and the 24, and they kind of pulled the same move.
Yeah, those cars all run really well together. And a lot of those guys up the front of the pack, they're very familiar with how each other runs. So if you can find somebody that you really like to run with, as you see now, Jeremy Jeffries making a move to the inside of Tim Nofsker in the middle of the tri-oval. But if you can find somebody that you really like to run with and hook up with them and make a long race where you're just make a long run where you're making a lot of speed, it can be very beneficial. Grant Wesley in the 88 behind the 24 of the Spirito, he's another car that we see doing that quite often.
Looks like drivers that were involved or at least had to slow up for that stack up in the tri-oval. Mark Paglia, Robbie Nices, Cy Jones, Andrew Miller, Wiley Code, and the two drivers we saw that were still trying to get their cars refired by time the leaders had gone green were Mike Rogers and Glenn Harris. So there's about a half dozen drivers that are hoping and praying for a caution flag to come out so they'll be able to catch back up.
Yeah, again, not sure exactly what it was that happened back there, but that's going to put them at a huge disadvantage. It's going to put them, quite a ways behind. So it looks like, maybe somebody checked up real hard. Could have possibly been guys trying to, catch up to the field and bunch it up before the restart happened to be right on the tail of those cars. But when that happens and you get one that checks up and another one that checks up even harder than that, you've, again, just like that, got 4 or 5 cars that before the green flag even comes out are sitting on trouble in the racetrack.
Saw a third line trying to form, but only 2 drivers were willing to try and make it work. Chuck McClure and Tim Nofsker, as Josh Metallic and Jeremy Jeffries on that inside line, they were making some good speed and now find themselves 3 wide with Rodney Sullivan and Bob Dixon in the middle. And, for Tim Nofsker, going back to last week, that the tough break even more so of not being credited with the victory is there's a new ruling here for the Tally Challenge this season, season 52, where if you are dubbed responsible for a caution the wreck that ends the race under caution, which was the case last week since the leaders hadn't made it back to the checkered flag, most drivers in the league, they are allowed. Oh, okay, we got a wreck over there with Wayne Primnow and Sonny Tallman, but no caution.
Yeah, I don't believe that's going to bring out a yellow flag, assuming Primnow can keep it down off the racing surface.
Oh, we got a caution. Caution is out.
Yeah, but he didn't lock it down. The car rolled back up into racing action. Officials forced to throw the yellow flag. They're not quite sure why he didn't lock it down there on the bottom of the racetrack, but that is going to bring our second caution here as they come across to take lap number 26.
There's a few drivers that are going to be very happy to see that caution after the issues they had when we went back green. But just quickly going back to Tim Nofsker, drivers are allowed to claim responsibility for 2 wrecks in a race before they are asked by race directory to park. For Tim Nofsker, the tough break is not only was he EOL'd for last week's wreck, but also he starts here tonight as if he's already claimed a wreck. So if he ends up causing an incident here tonight, then he would have to park right away. So it's just a tough situation there for the driver of the 088. And we know that he's very, very good when it comes to the end of these races. Was a 2-time winner last season.
Yeah, and that's a really uncomfortable position to be in, on a typical race, maybe even more so at a super speedway, because so much can happen so fast, and you can easily find yourself at fault for something, even if it was completely unintentional, as it usually is the case on super speedways. So he's really got to step lightly here tonight. Even anything as small as just a little bit of inadvertent bumper grab, which, in real racing might not be such a huge issue, but with the way that the desync bubbles on these cars kind of work can really, really put a hurt on your day. So Nofsker trying to be real careful as he sits back now, scored in 16th position.
There you see the contact. It looked like Sonny Tallman, just like the car would not turn off of turn 2 for him up into the driver's side door of Wayne Primnow. And yes, he did come back up the track and the yellow flag came out, but he had a heck of a save there because that car at one point was headed nose first to the inside wall, but he didn't hit a thing down there.
Absolutely, and that could have been a real race under if he'd have nosed into that inside wall. But some pretty good driving there as we see the leaders now on pit road. I don't think we're going to see anything out of the ordinary. Doesn't look like anybody taking tires, gas only. Bob Seminara, Joe DeSpirito again The first two off of pit road, with Garrett a close third, Wesley fourth, Mobbs fifth, Shelton sixth. So these guys, I don't think there's any big moves happening under yellow while these pit stops are taking place. So I think we're going to rack them back up and get ready to do the same thing we just did last restart.
Little interested that they came to pit road here because they had just gone back green about 5 laps ago. They're still going to have to come to pit road at least twice before the conclusion of this race, regardless if they had stayed out or come to pit road. So I'm surprised that just about everybody came down on this lap rather than a couple of drivers thinking, let's try and get some track position here.
Well, I agree with you, but at the same time, I question if that may be because as dominant as that middle lane has been, we haven't seen anybody be able to get that bottom or top line working. Just enough cars won't line up to work together, and everybody's been so content to run that middle line. I'm almost questioning if these drivers are almost expecting a long green flag run here, maybe a green flag run to the next round of pit stops.
We do have 4 drivers that stayed out here: Sonny Tallman, Cy Jones, Andrew Miller, and Wayne Pribnow. Cy Jones and Wayne Pribnow actually stayed out an extra lap under the last caution, so we might see them come to pit road this time. I'm not sure about that 47 of Andrew Miller, though. We'll see if he's going to duck onto pit road. Sonny Tallman staying out the extra lap, as I believe he claimed responsibility for that last caution. And nope, looks like all 4 of those drivers that stayed out the extra lap, they're going to come down pit road this time. Now, we know, Zach, that if we ran this race green flag all the way to the finish, these drivers, after their 3rd pit stop, would find themselves roughly about 5 to 6 laps short of fuel. So, did they maybe eliminate that possibility here with coming down and topping off the fuel tank?
That is a very real possibility. However, I don't think you can ever really put too much of a strategy on how these races are going to play out just because it is so unpredictable. But if I was a gambling man and in the driver's seat of one of these cars right now, again, I'm thinking a green flag run to the next pit stop and then possibly a yellow flag somewhere after that. Or conversely, you could also run 10, 11 laps under green flag, have another yellow flag come out, which would ideally set them up, pretty well for the end of the race, especially if they can just save just a little bit of gas. So we'll have to see how they play it here.
So looks like we have gotten the indication that we'll get the 1 to green next time around. So we'll be going back green, I think, on lap 30. So we'll be nearing the halfway point of this race, working our 2nd caution of the day. And just an update on a couple of drivers that got some pretty significant damage from their wrecks earlier on. Looks like Dante Ricky, like his car still up to speed. He's going to be restarting in the 20th position. That 08 of Glenn Harris, I'm not sure about him because he was one of the drivers that was caught up in that stack up on the restart, and he had actually gotten some pretty good left front damage into the inside steel guardrail with that wreck over in turn 3. But I think from what I saw just at the tail end of that wreck over in the tri-oval and from the incident we just had here off of turn 2, I think most of those drivers got through relatively unscathed in terms of damage sustained.
Yeah, I don't think that there's going to be anything of major concern, but what this yellow flag on the backstretch did do is it did give those drivers that were, caught up in that circumstance on the green flag in the middle of the tri-oval an opportunity to get those cars repaired and get them caught back up to the pack. So we'll have at least 4 or 5 more cars for certain in this lead draft when we go back green that we didn't have last time. And I'm sure they're very thankful for that. Nobody wants to see the yellow flag come out or anybody crash around them. However, that could have really put an end to their day, essentially, had that not happened and they weren't given that opportunity to close it back up and get back with those leaders in that draft when we go back racing again.
Lights should go out this time, and indeed they will. So we have gotten the 1 to green signal. Lap 30 is when these drivers will return to racing. And I just want to go back. I know it's early on in the season, but we talked last season when we saw John Godfrey pull off a great pit strategy in the season finale to pick up the win that year. We kind of looked ahead here to season 52, and we said, if that's the case, if that's going to happen at the end of that season, we're going to see drivers take the opportunity to do the same thing this season. And there's a lot of drivers that we've already talked about that are up there near the top of the point stands, but I see a couple of guys that are just outside of the top 10 looking in. And one that kind of jumps out to me is the 00 of Wayne Pribnow. This is a guy that we don't normally see up at the front of the field. Normally hangs towards the back and then makes his charge late, but he's been in the right place in the right time in the last 2 weeks to be able to find himself 11th in points after 2 races.
Absolutely. And Wayne can put together some pretty good runs. If I'm not mistaken, I believe he is also hearing impaired. So doing a pretty good job out there on the field. As long as he can keep that car clean and make it to the end of the race, he can put together a good finish. But he's also another one of those guys that we've seen that oftentimes gets swept up in incidents not of his own making. So assuming that 00 car is okay, because again, you mentioned it, he didn't spin it down into that inside concrete wall, saving himself a ton of damage out on the racetrack. So we could see him back up to speed, and by the end of the race, maybe up in the top 5 or top 10.
And, we talk about a lot of these drivers, how they're up there running well in the point standings, but I don't think that we can really say that they're going to get in on consistency. I think that they're still going to be in the mentality that I got to go out here, I got to win my way into the playoffs, because there's so many names outside of the top 10, like Bernie Mobbs, Jeremy Jeffries, Chuck McClure, Dante Ricky, Richard Martin, Tim Nofsker. We know that they're going to probably be able to win their way into the playoffs, and that's going to eliminate more and more available spots for drivers to point their way in.
Absolutely. But then again, those guys also looking to get a little bit opportunistic. If you remember, some big names like Donnie Garrett, Josh Metallic could not reach season 51 victory lane. So those guys looking to go out there and maybe capitalize off that. This restart, Grant Wesley gave a tremendous push to the 24 of Joe DeSpirito. As you see, the number 90 of Bernie Mobbs doing some real bad side-to-side warp on the inside line, that second car in line. He's going to have to work his way down off the racing surface, which he will. A good show of sportsmanship. That's going to leave Bob Seminara, who's now going to blend up into that middle line. Rodney Sullivan's now leading the field on the inside line.
We got a caution out here. I'm not sure for what. Oh, it's on the back straight going into 3. Perry Bond in the 60 has gone around. Just ahead of the 00 of Wayne Pribnow. I don't know if any other drivers were involved in this or not. The 60 was the only one I saw that was spinning at the time.
I am wondering if the 60 car missed a shift into 4th gear or potentially lost 4th gear. When you go back and take a look at that, Seth, I don't know if we might be able to get an onboard from the 60 of Perry Bond, but it sounded like the engine did a real high-pitched sputter there, as if, like I said, he missed that shift or 4th gear broke entirely. Maybe a little contact from behind with the number 8 of Jeremy Jeffries.
And here off of turn 2 and on to the back straightaway, and that's, oh yeah, definitely lost some speed there for sure, as the distance between himself and Jeremy Jeffries closed up in a hurry. Then the bump sends him down into the 710 of Manny D. And we're going to, as you said, we're going to take a look and see if we can get an onboard and find out what happened with that 60 machine, because you're right, it just kind of looked like all of a sudden he lost speed, almost kind of a situation of shifting into 4th, and 4th wasn't there.
Yeah, and you can hear it. You can hear it hit that rev limiter. And it just doesn't look like he ever shifted into 4th. That, or he shifted into 4th potentially, which could have really spiked the RPMs on that motor, which were already pretty pegged out from running in high gear in 3rd, and had to back shift back into 3rd gear again, which could also account for the loss in speed.
I think that's exactly what happened. I think that he might have actually downshifted back to 3rd, because when we were riding on board, then you could see that the dial was red where he was in 3rd gear. It was topping out. When he shifted, you could see he shifted into 4th. Everything was fine. Then the dial went back to red as if he had downshifted to the 3rd gear again. Yeah,
so not sure exactly what may have caused that, or it could have been an instance of a late gear shift, gear break as well. So not really sure. It's unfortunate to see, unfortunate that it did cause a caution, but only a few leaders opting to come down and take fuel. It looked like about from the 08 of Glenn Harris, maybe, or my mistake there. I definitely see.
Like
my apologies.
Like DeSpirito and Seminara, they came down.
Yep, they came down. Wesley and Garrett did stay out, so looks like your leader's banking on another long green flag run. Again, this is going to set them up for about, I don't know how many laps is that going to be left to go there, Seth. Probably about 30 laps to go, maybe 31, 32 when they go back to green. So again, that's still going to leave them short, but doable with one more pit stop.
Well, these drivers all came down and topped off on lap 25, so theoretically they should be able to make it to about lap 43, which would put them about 23, 24 laps shy of the finish, which is still outside of their fuel window. If we look at guys like DeSpirito, Seminara, Shelton, Metallic, who came to pit road, they pitting on lap 32, they would be able to make it to about lap 50. That'd be with 16 to go, so they would be able to make it on one more pit stop. These guys up here, unless they can save a ton, I think they've still got 2 more trips to pit road in their future.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they can really save that much. However, that was a pretty quick yellow as well. So I don't know how much of a disadvantage they'll be. They'll definitely be at least a few laps shorter than what those cars that just pitted will be. But I don't think that you can save 3 laps under green flag conditions here at Talladega the way that you just have to be in the gas constantly.
So we're going to wait and see here how many drivers officially did stay out when they crossed the line. And I am getting official word here, Zach, that the 60 did indeed lose 4th gear. He has actually taken his car back to the garage with a gearbox issue. So it was indeed a blown 4th gear for Perry Bond for this, our 3rd caution of the day.
That's unfortunate for Bond and unfortunate for the cars that were caught up behind him. But again, that's one of those things that you can't plan or account for when you're out there running as tight as these guys are. One of those cars spits a gear or blows a motor. Next thing you know, you're driving through their rear end, which looked to be the case with the number 8 of Jeremy Jeffries. So hopefully his car or his crew was able to take a good look at that. He did stay out on the racetrack. He did not come into the pits, I don't believe. So his spotter must have told him that it looked okay, and he's going to be looking to be clean and green and work his way back up to the field again.
Well, I was wondering about the cars of Seminara, DeSpirito, Metallic, Jessica Shelton, drivers that were part of the lead group that came to pit road, how they were going to work their way from the back to the front. 2 drivers hit with penalties here under this round of pit stops. Seminara, who has led 25 laps today, and Jessica Shelton, both hit with EOL, so they're going to have to work their way through a lot of traffic to get back up to the front. They've been running the top 5 pretty much the entirety of this race.
Yep, absolutely. But if there's any 2 drivers that we know can work their way from the back up toward the front, it would be the 712 of Seminara and the 94 of Just Shelton. We've seen both of those drivers do that on numerous occasions over the last 2 seasons. So while it's not the ideal place to be sitting halfway through this race, there is still the entire second half of this race to go. So as long as there's no major issue on the racetrack, I would expect to see those 2 drivers back up at the front by the end of the race.
So it looks like officially we had 13 drivers stay out under this caution. Correction, make that 14 drivers. Grant Wesley's going to be the leader when we go back green. We should get the 1 to green signal this time by. Donnie Garrett will be 2nd, Chuck McClure 3rd, Bob Dixon 4th, Jeff Crivello in 5th, Tim Nofsker, Richard Martin, Chris Emery, Chris Elliott, and Robbie Nisus will complete the top 10. And then the other drivers that stayed out, Jerm Lewis 11th, 12th, Jeremy Jeffries, 13th, Dave Melson, and Andrew Miller in 14th. Joe DeSpirito, who is the highest rank of the drivers that came to pit road under this caution, he will restart in the 15th position. Still 35 drivers running, all 35 on the lead lap. The lone DNF driver so far, as we already mentioned, Perry Bond in the 60 machine, finishing 36th here tonight.
So our point leader coming into tonight's race, Seth, is the number 9 of Chris Elliott. Chris Elliott finding himself restarting in the number 9 spot out on the racetrack when we go back green flag racing. We've heard him talk about consistency and getting that Cheetos car up there at the end of the race to get it into contention for a win. He's doing a really good job out there tonight. He came in tonight 1 point over previous winner Josh Metallic. Hank Middleton, another driver we haven't talked much much about tonight, driving the number 2 Chevrolet Camaro, sits third in points, just 7 points out of the point lead. And again, Seth, these are guys that we haven't talked a whole lot about, but so far this season, been real super impressive and very consistent out on the racetrack. So we'll have to see if those guys can make some more waves out on the racetrack once we go back green flag racing.
And, you know, there's no doubt that these guys were competitive last season as well, but I have to think that, you know, season 50, season 51, with every season that passes, you learn a couple new tricks. You see some of these guys that run up the front consistently week after week, and you pick up on certain things. And I think that we're starting to see a culmination here in season 52 of drivers now putting what they've learned to work. I mean, talking about Chris Elliott, he's the only driver this season that has started off the year with back-to-back top 5 finishes.
Absolutely. So he knows how to get the job done out there on the racetrack, and every race that he finishes that well is only going to build his confidence that much more. And when you can go through the season with that much confidence, carry that confidence with you, you'd be amazed at how much that can help you finish out on the racetrack. Hank Middleton, third in points. He's a driver we haven't talked about very much in the previous seasons, but he is a super speedway expert as well as some of these other big names that we talk about quite a bit. So I am not surprised to see him sitting third in points as we go back to green flag racing.
Grant Wesley gets us back underway. We'll see if he's going to jump up there to the top side with the 77 of Donnie Garrett, or will he stay with the 17 of Chuck McClure? Looks like he will stay with McClure, get him clear of Garrett. Now they'll jump up to the top. Crivello's going to be the one trying to lead the charge on the bottom. Looks like 3 Chargers all lined up there with the 40, the 56 rather, the 43 and the 9 of Chris Elliott.
But what we're seeing those guys do that the top, or see those guys not doing that the middle line is getting right on each other's bumpers and making a little bit more speed down those straightaways. So you see the 77 of Garrett's going to try to squeeze down into the 56 of Crivello. I thought there was going to be a little bit of contact there, but it looked like there was just enough room for him to slide to the inside as well.
Just barely, as now a couple of Dodges side by side for fourth. Bob Dixon on the top. He's got Tim Nofsker helping him. Crivello looked a little loose there through 1 and 2. Richard Martin had to back off. Now Martin looks like he wants to force his way up between Nofsker and Chris Emery.
Yup, and Chris Elliott decided that he wanted no more of that bottom line. He's going to move up the racetrack, try to catch up to the rear end of that 222 car in front of him. The Crivello, Martin, and Jerm Lewis machines now falling farther back as Crivello slides up into that 7th position on that outside line.
Richard Martin nearly forced his way up into that outside line there. A little contact between himself and Chris Elliott going into the entrance of turn 3. They remain side by side. See Martin again pinching up the 9 machine, and he left the door open to the inside. Jerm Lewis says, all right, if there's a lane, I might take it, but instead tucks back in behind the 43.
Yeah, he wisely backed out of that. That lane was going to close out really fast on him. But again, I'm surprised that we're not seeing more 2 and 3 wide racing as that middle line again checking out about 7 or 8 cars the advantage down the back straightaway. The first side-by-side being the 9 of Chris Elliott and the 43 of Richard Martin into turn 3.
And we were nearly 4 wide on the back straightaway for a brief moment. Mark Pagley was in the middle of that. Robbie Nisus almost comes down across the nose of Andrew Miller. This is a hornet's nest back here, and it's a lot of the drivers that came to pit road under the last caution that are in the middle of it.
Absolutely. So I don't think it's so much surprising to see Joe DeSpirito working on methodically bobbing and waving his way through the field, but still behind him sitting 3 wide. It looks like on the bottom of the racetrack, those guys going to sort themselves out. The 1 car stuck in the middle there as Mob's challenges to the bottom is the 3 of David Cannon off of turn 2.
Tie-dye machine just ahead of him is Hank Middleton in the 2. We talked about him, top 5 in the points coming into this race, is still 3 wide, about 2, 3, maybe 4 rows deep. This is racing around the 16th, 17th, 18th position in the field. They're all trying to settle it out here as quickly as they can. Looks like they're finally going to get back to double wide racing as further up, near contact between Dave Cannon and Mark Paglia. They were 3 wide with the 143 of Bob Dixon.
Yep, and those guys back there got themselves sorted out, so now they're just 2 by 2. Some drivers frantically trying to work themselves back toward the front, but now we've got a top line working on challenging the leaders. Tim Nosker has jumped up high. Richard Martin is behind him with the aid of Jeremy Jeffries. They're going to get right to the right rear quarter panel of the 143 of Bob Dixon down the back straightaway as they look to now work up a little farther toward the 77 of Garrett into turn number 3.
Yeah, Tim Novsker, of course, we've already talked about him having to kind of tiptoe in this race, but when you consider last week, the final lap, all bets are off. You're going to do what you're going to do to try and win that race, and then you have the week to reflect on it. I mean, how much of a fire do you think that's lit underneath this driver here tonight, knowing that he had a victory last week, but it did not count, and he's trying to get another one here tonight?
Well, if there's any driver that we know that's absolutely capable of going out here almost any week and getting a victory, it is the 088 of Novsker. And I think he's veteran enough to really kind of put that behind him, as disappointing as that may have been, because he thought he was the victor. We talked to him in victory lane. We interviewed him. We did the whole 9 yards. And to find out after the fact that it's been taken from you, yeah, I think it lights a little bit of a fire. But Tim Novsker is also a very smart race car driver. He's a very aggressive race car driver, but he's very smart. He knows that he can get out there and get another victory to lock himself in. So as long as he's patient, we saw last year he did miss the cut after getting 2 victories, but that's because he wasn't there the entire season. So if he's running every week this year, I think even having to take that loss last week is something that he can absolutely rebound from.
And, we saw that he ended up being the first one to cross the start-finish line last week. And one of our keys to the race that we covered last week was, if you have a fast car, people are going to work with you. He was the guy leading that top line. Richard Martin, Jeremy Jeffries, Dave Melson, and Joe DeSpirito jumped up there with him. So he has got some fast machines willing to work with him, but he just hasn't been able to really lead them with any forward progress. Looks like they might try again. Martin jumps back up to the top, but Novsker doesn't go with him this time.
Well, and you know what I'm seeing out there on the racetrack, Seth, and I'm kind of perplexed that, the drivers aren't seeing this as well. I know they're smart. I know they're watching what's going on at all times. Nobody's challenging that middle line. And when they do challenge that middle line, there's just not enough race cars or not enough cars willing to get up there and bump draft with the cars in front of them to really push any progress forward. So I think that's a lot of what we're seeing. Again, as we've talked about all race long, that middle line doing it masterfully, the first 3 or 4 cars staying locked right bumper to bumper to maximize their speed, as we now see a third line forming off of turn number 2. I believe that's led by the 2 of Middleton.
It is, and that's nearly into the wall. They ran so high there through 1 and 2. Now Mark Paglia is going to jump up there. David Cannon, Josh Metallic. Looks like we've also got Sonny Tallman, Bob Seminara, and Jessica Shelton leading that outside line. That would be called the junior line here at Talladega.
That would be called the junior line, but right now that is the danger zone, as we've seen in races past now. The guys that are trying to contend for space in that middle line now sharing that middle line, as they're now 3 wide exiting the tri-oval. Paglia up high on the right rear of Sullins. It looks like he's going to be able to maintain that position into turn number 1. Now 5 cars on the extreme outside line, but as we were just talking about, with 2 cars sharing that middle line, that doesn't leave a whole lot of space for that extreme top. Oh, we got trouble.
Sonny Tallman up and over. Shelton's collecting. Another car is flipping. I think that's the 36 of Dassault. Wiley Cote is collected up in that one. Cy Jones is involved. There was another machine back there. I think it was the 00 of Wayne Pribb now. Couple of airborne and flipping machines, and I don't know what it is, but it always seems like right when we get to the window of when drivers have to start thinking about coming to pit road, we end up having these wrecks. In the next 2 or 3 laps, Wesley, McClure, Garrett, these guys would have had to have come to pit road for fuel.
Yep, so it keeps getting cut short. It looks like 4, 5, 6 cars involved. Tallman never did go over. Dassault with a hard impact to that outside wall before tumbling down the back straightaway. I think when we look back at this, Seth, I have a feeling it's going to be eerily reminiscent of the incident on the back straightaway between the 55 of Sonny Tallman and the 00 of Wayne Pribb now.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yep, 36 of Dassault pushes up there. Car on that inside line gets into Sonny Tallman, who then in turn gets, or actually I think it was Shelton that he got into, then got up into Sonny Tallman. Cy Jones spun down to the inside there. We're going to have to see about the full extent of damage of drivers that spun down there to the inside. And to your point, that was hard impact for that 36 machine, as after the contact, his car just kind of hooked dead right and went straight on into the outside safer barrier.
Yeah, so some hard impacts again there. And how does it feel to be Jess Shelton right now? Just cannot seem to avoid these incidents on the racetrack, finding her. But the one thing that she is specialized in is somehow overcoming the adversity when this seems to happen to her week after week. She finds herself running in the top 5 the majority of the race, then falls back to the back of the pack, gets involved in incidents, has to go to the back, get repairs made, and bounce herself back up toward the front of the pack again. So if there's any driver that can overcome that, I believe that is that 94 car out there. So none of these cars really coming down to pit to get their damage taken care of yet. I think we'll see what the full extent of that is going to be next time by, but all the leaders now, as you mentioned before, Seth, going to come down, top off, and this could hypothetically bring them home the rest of the way if they can save just enough under yellow flag here.
Certainly could. You saw there some contact to the left side of the machine for both Jessica Shelton and the 00 of Wayne Cribb now. Looks like they should be able to continue from that. But going back to, Jessica Shelton, what you were just talking about, yeah, I mean, if you look at her first 2 races, it's been a kind of a bumpy start here to season 53. She ended up getting involved in a wreck in the latter third of the season opener, trying to find a way in line, but wasn't clear, and spun around to the outside wall. Still with no rear end, that car was able to come back and finish in the 15th position. And then last week, got involved in a wreck, went side by side with Donnie Garrett. Donnie Garrett warped. Shelton went up into the wall. A lot of damage sustained to the front end of her car, but she was one of many drivers who crossed the start-finish line at the checkered flag backwards, slid across the line in the 8th position, officially finished in 7th. And because of those comeback runs, 2 practically wrecked race cars, she's still tied for 7th in points coming into the 3rd race of the season.
Yeah, well, that just speaks to how smart Jess really is out there on the racetrack and her patience and perseverance. Because if you remember, she had to point her way in all the way to the final 4 last season and had to overcome a lot of these sort of incidents last season and still managed to bring it home in the top 4 in points. So she knows what she's doing out there as long as she can be patient and let the race come to her. It's unfortunate that she keeps getting wrecked up like this. Again, the majority of these times, no fault of her own, but she knows how to bounce back from it. And I don't even believe that she came in to damage or to repair. Oh, she's going to come in this time by. So we'll have to see what her crew does on her car, see how long they keep her on pit road as she tops off in gas and tries to get that left front damage. The impact didn't appear to be too severe on the back straightaway, but we'll have to see exactly how long they take.
Chris Emery stayed out a lap, got himself a bonus point for a lap led. Now Andrew Miller will look to do the same. He and Glenn Harris will probably be on pit road this next time by. And when they do come to pit road, even if we get the 1 green signal next time around, I do believe, Zach, that everybody now will be within the window where they can make it on fuel, even if we went green to the finish. So when we get to this point of the race, that's when you start getting the most nervous, because that's one less thing for these drivers to think about. Now they can just look out the windshield and go race.
Absolutely. So like you mentioned, that should set them up pretty well. It might be just a little close for any drivers that might restart on the front row if they are able to maintain that position, just because we do know the fuel consumption in the first row or 2 of the field does tend to be quite a bit more than what it is if you're farther back in the pack and just using the draft to maintain that momentum. So as long as they keep clutching it, which we know Grant Wesley is absolutely the master of doing, I would think that they should be okay, but maybe still just a little bit of question in the back of my mind.
Well, the first 25 laps of this race were led by pole sitter Bob Seminaro. We've had some leaders here and there intermingled during these caution laps of drivers getting some bonus points, but the last 13 laps under green, they have been led by the 88 of Grant Wesley. Now, Wesley last season was a 3-time winner, 2 wins during the regular season, 1 win during the playoffs, which eventually locked him into the Final 4. Bob Seminaro last season was a 2-time winner, but neither one of them have won yet this season. Wesley will be restarting the leader. Seminara is going to be all the way back in 16th after getting hit with that pit road penalty. But you touched on it here, Zach. There's some guys up here that we saw last season and this season that have been running consistently up inside of the top 5. A lot of runner-up finishes as well. The 17 of Chuck McClure, the 77 of Donnie Garrett, the 143 of Bob Dixon. I mean, these are guys that we know can win races and have positioned themselves to win races, and circumstances just don't seem to work out for them. Looking at some of these guys, they've been working with the 88 of Grant Wesley, but at what point do those alliances go away just based on how long a winless streak they've had?
Well, I would think that it would be in the last couple laps of the race. However, that being said, I can't tell you how many times we've interviewed guys, and countless times they mention, yeah, I obviously want to go out there and win the race, but at the same time, I want to keep helping the guy that I'm pushing along here, because if I pull out into traffic, out of that draft, there's a chance that I could get freight trained to the back of the pack. So I think you have to be tremendously confident in your car and tremendously confident in the speed that you have in your car to make those moves, because these alliances are very important out here on the racetrack. When you find a guy that you can work with really well, you want to work with them as much as possible, and the guys that you can make the most speed with. Sometimes bailing out on that guy in the last lap is not always beneficial for you or the both of you, let alone those relationships that you build throughout the season.
If Chuck McClure wins tonight's race, we're going to have to go back as the race-winning move, the completion of lap 46, because he brought his machine down pit road to top off the fuel tank. You talked about that even these drivers here, even though they're in the fuel window, it's still going to be close. He may have just eliminated that kind of possibility for his finish of the race.
Absolutely, that is a possibility. That being said, if we go green and get another quick yellow, that could end up being extremely detrimental for him, as the leaders that are currently out front could then save another 2 or 3 laps of gas, and he's lost all of that track position. So while I don't disagree with what he just did, at the same time, there's still risk involved with it, so we'll have to see how it plays out for him.
There's also risk as well, talking about that caution, that he could be in it, because we saw 3 wide and almost 4 wide on that last run back in the midway portion of the field. That's where he's restarting.
Yep, and with 19 laps to go at the green flag here, I don't know if we're going to continue to see that middle line dominating the race. I think it's go time, knowing that you probably don't have to stop in the pits for gas or anything else. If a yellow were to come out again, I think you have to start working your way up toward the front of the field now. You have to go now.
Grant Wesley back through the gears. We'll see if he and Donnie Garrett can kind of work out the system they've had on the last couple of restarts. But Seminara, and make that rather Despirito, I think he realized that was what was happening. He gave a shove to the 77, trying to get him alongside of Grant Wesley. Did not work. As a matter of fact, Donnie Garrett's going to lose touch with Wesley as he makes contact with Dixon.
We got another big crash on the back straightaway. About halfway through the field, multiple cars involved, 8, 9, maybe 10 back there, stopped in the middle of the racetrack. So there's that quick yellow we were talking about, Seth.
Saw another car up and over. It might have been the 47 of Andrew Miller. Bobby Farrell is involved. Wayne Pribnow, Sonny Tallman, Jerm Lewis. Cy Jones may have gotten a piece. I saw the 28 of Mark Paglia was spun around. Another big wreck, bringing out here our fifth caution of the day. And it was behind the 17 of Chuck McClure, so he dodged a bullet there, but
the 2 blew up. The 2 of Hank Middleton blew up right in front of the 55, I believe, which caused a massive checkup. He was in the middle of the 3 lines when it happened.
This is interesting, because we ended up having earlier on a restart, Perry Bond have an issue where he blew 4th gear. I'm almost wondering if maybe something similar happened with Hank Middleton, because it would have been on the back straightaway on a restart. I don't know if it's just the timing of these drivers when they shift into 4th gear, if they're letting 3rd gear over rev a little too much, but this is looking eerily similar to what we saw earlier on with the 60.
Yep, and it looked like it was exactly when Middleton was going. Actually, I don't believe Middleton had even made it to 4th gear at that point, Seth. Looking at the telemetry on that wreck, it looked like he was just getting it wound up. He wasn't even quite to 180 miles per hour yet, so I don't believe he would have shifted into 4th at that point. And it looked like as he got to the high end of the revs, that motor just let go in the worst possible place.
3rd in points, Hank Middleton. This is going to really hurt him in the point standings after what's been a very consistent start to the season for him. Let's take a look and see. I'm pretty sure that the 47 of Andrew Miller did go up and over. Well, he didn't go over, but he did go up in the air after some contact with himself. Bobby Farrell, Billy Elliser in the 26 also is involved. Like the 08 of Glenn Harris was able to snake his way through.
Yeah, just a real big incident again. Unfortunately for the two of Middleton, on all the cars around him, that car just lost a tremendous amount of speed when it blew up the way that it did. And there was nowhere for any of those cars to go. So it's hard to scrub speed. It's something that we talked about last week as well. It's hard enough to scrub speed on a flat surface in a straight line. It's even harder when you're in the middle of these corners trying to turn, slow down, not look up your tires at the same time, keep the weight transfer in check so you don't spin that car out. And we see it just results in just a massive incident. So that's unfortunate for all drivers involved there.
Looks like Jack DeSalt also was out of the race about 6 laps ago after he was involved in that huge hit on the back straightaway. So he joins Perry Bond in the garage area, and Hank Middleton also now has taken and made the hard left-hand turn into the infield garage. So he will finish 34th, DeSalt 35th, and Perry Bond will be 36th, so leaving us with 33 drivers out here to settle things out. Of course, for some of those drivers back there involved in that wreck off of turn 2, we're going to have to wait and see if they'll be up to speed or not. But you touched on it here when that wreck took place. Now guys up here at the front, Wesley, Dixon, Jeffries, Garrett, DeSpirito, they're going to be able to make it on fuel here from here on out. The question mark is completely gone.
Absolutely. So that's kind of what we were talking about. Unfortunately for Chuck McClure, he did lose quite a few positions by playing that strategy. Had they gone green the rest of the way, it would have worked out well for him. However, just not working that way. He did gain a couple positions from the restart. I believe he restarted 16th, worked his way up to 14th before that yellow flag came out. So now as we work our way back around, I believe we should be getting the 1 to go this time by. Once they resume racing, Seth, we will be within that window of we will be racing back to the yellow flag with caution, hopefully, every time the yellow flag comes out. So that's another factor that we now have to put into play here as we work our way down, now 16 laps remaining across the line.
And we keep talking about this even though we ended up making it to the white flag under green flag conditions in the first 2 races, but these drivers might not necessarily be racing to the checkered flag. They may be racing to the caution flag when we get down to around the start of lap 63. That's when we talk about if you're outside of the top 10 or even maybe in the latter half of the top 10, that's when you got to start making moves because you never know if the race is going to end under the caution or not.
Speaking of the top 10, Seth, I'm looking at our running order at the moment. We still have a lot of really fast cars that are going to be trying to make their way from outside the top 10. The top 10 currently as they stand, again, Wesley is your leader, Dixon and Garrett, second and third, Jeremy Jeffries, DeSpirito rounding out your top 5. Dave Melson, Jeff Crivello, Bob Seminara, Bernie Mobbs, Robbie Nisus. That is your top 10. Now you look a little farther back from that. We've got Manny D, David Cannon, Wiley Coate, Chuck McClure, Richard Martin, Josh Metallic, Tim Nofsker, Dante Ricky, Chris Elliott, Jess Shelton, and the last 6 or 7 names there alone we know are more than capable of getting up there and getting into contention for the win. So with about 14 laps to go, once we go back green, I don't know what they're going to do here, but they've really got to make something happen and hope that middle line doesn't stack up and, people are willing to work with them to get back up through the pack again.
Got to worry about wonder about that 84 of Dante Ricky, because we know we saw him get involved in the first caution of the evening, sustain quite a bit of left side damage, and we know that his MO is really to start at the back, work his way to the front, but we haven't really yet seen him crack the top 10. So I almost wonder if that damage has stifled his speed a little bit, or if he's just making sure he's overly cautious. He is going to be restarting outside the top 15. We'll see if now it's going to be go time for him to make his charge to the front.
Yeah, and I think it doesn't matter where you are on the racetrack. Again, like we mentioned on the last restart, I think it is go time because we are now 15 laps to go this time by. The lights on top of the pace car have turned off, so it will officially be 14 laps remaining when we go back to green, Seth, and I don't think you can wait anymore. I don't think that you can count on the race making it green all the way to the end, so if you're going to make positions up, I really believe it has to be within the next 5 to 8 laps if you're being really serious about it, because anything after that, who knows anyway, because we're going to be 3-4 wide, hopefully probably have cars upside down on the roof sliding across the line backwards again this week.
Would love to have been a fly inside the cockpit of that number 88 or on the pit box or tap into the radio communications or whatever to find out what made Grant Wesley choose the outside line, because we've really seen most of the time on restarts, the race leader chooses the bottom to make sure they are clear of the second row or the first row, whichever the case may be, with whoever they're working with. Coming off of turn 2, then they jump to the outside line down the back straightaway. But Grant's electing to start on the top side at the drop of the green flag.
Yeah, well, I don't think it's too hard to figure out. I don't think Grant has any issue working with Donnie Garrett, but you look at the car who is now lining up behind Grant Wesley, that white number 8 car of Jeremy Jeffries, who we also know is not only a really good pusher and has a lot of speed, but has a very real shot of winning this race as well. So if I'm the 88 of Grant Wesley and I have to choose who's going to be behind me, I don't think that 8 car is such a bad option.
Yeah, Jeremy Jeffries, a former winner from last season, but much like the case of Tim Nofsker, wasn't high enough in the points for his win to count towards a spot in the playoffs. Well, after 2 races, he's 14th in points, so a win here today would certainly lock him into the playoff field, as Wesley in the Chevrolet, Dixon in the Dodge. We'll have to see who's going to get the better jump here, as we will officially be going back green with 14 laps to go at Talladega.
We're about halfway through the tri-oval right now. You see the 88 of Wesley has about a car length over the 8 of Jeremy Jeffries behind him. Bob Dixon and Donnie Garrett, on the other hand, they are bumper to bumper working themselves across the line. However, the 8 of Jeffries with a much better start than the 143 of Dixon. Dixon lost a lot of time on that inside line, as there's now that 2-car breakaway. Dixon now sideways in the middle of 1 and 2. He touched that apron. That's really going to jumble things up behind him off the second corner.
Almost stacked them 3 wide there. Now Seminara's going to jump all the way to the top. Who goes with him? Looks like it might possibly be Robbie Nisus in the 54. There's still 3 wide here. Almost looking 4 wide around the 10th position.
Man, Robbie Nisus, he is in that top middle line right now. He almost came down to the right rear of the 56 of Jeff Crivello. They keep it clean and green. Mob's now the car on the inside line. The number 143 of Bob Dixon losing a ton of time on that extreme low line. He has no drafting help, no bumping help whatsoever. He's now going to line up in front of the 90 of Mobs into turns 1 and 2, as they will work side by side alongside the 54 of Nisus.
Not sure where to focus the camera. They're almost 3 wide again mid-pack, but up towards the front, Bob Seminara and Joe DeSpirito are slicing and dicing on that top side, trying to make something work. They had Jeff Crivello with them for a moment. They've now lost their help. Here comes Robbie Nisus, Dave Cannon, Chuck McClure, and others, so that high line about to gain some friends.
Yup, and the number 8 car of Jeremy Jeffries looking just about a half a bumper above the 88 of Wesley ahead of him. I was wondering to see if he was going to try to make a move there, but he will settle down back to the inside of him. Seminara now working the 77's back bumper as Garrett works his way to the outside line. That top line is coming, and that top line's coming fast. Grant Wesley working that lower middle line, but that high middle line with much higher car count into turn 1.
Yeah, we're going to start to see what we're used to seeing, where both lanes going to share that middle groove right between the 2 sets of dotted white lines through the corners, which means it's going to be close quarter racing here, door to door, for these final 10 laps or so. They're 3 wide back there again. That's the 84 of Dante Ricky with no help on that top side, fading back outside of the top 20.
Yeah, and it's not good to have damage and to not have drafting help, so he's going to have to settle himself back in line, back up front. The 88 of Wesley, the slow car that has nobody to the outside of him. Jeffries now has the 77 of Garrett, and Garrett's going to make the move on the outside of Wesley through the tri-oval.
Boy, that outside line has got a great ton of momentum through 3 and 4. It's going to draw Garrett even with Wesley. I think he led that lap by a splitter, did the 77, and he edges ahead into turn 1. Another line forming, 4 wide around the 5th, 6th position.
Chris Emery in that 222 is putting that car at the extreme bottom of the track, riding that yellow line around the bottom, making it 4 wide, but he's making moves with help of the 616 of Jerm Lewis behind him. Emery now going to look to the inside of the 56 of Jeff Crivello, an opportunity to make it 4 wide, but he's going to wisely choose not to do that, as those cars are 2 cars in the middle line, the 003 of Cannon, the extreme high line, and there's just not a lot of room out there on the racetrack right now into the trioval.
There is no room whatsoever. We are double wide from 3rd place back to around 7th, 3 wide, another 7 rows deep, 4 wide now. Crivello stuck in the middle, Emery on the bottom, Novsker up on the top, and extreme outside line is Dave Cannon with Metallic.
Everybody's still keeping it relatively green, but Cannon not having a whole lot of room on that extreme outside line off of turn number 2. Still 4 wide down the back straightaway. Cannon now working to the outside of the 17 of McClure. We've got 3 white cars on the middle of the racetrack. Cars racing all over the place. Now 3 wide for almost the 3rd position.
We were 4 wide, 2 rows deep, as now they are slicing and dicing at the front. Seminara to the bottom on Donnie Garrett, who is throwing some big blocks down the back straightaway. Seminara's got Wesley with him. Despiritos behind the 77 on the top side. Still 4 wide back around 10th place.
Absolutely. These guys doing a masterful job keeping it clean, being very patient, giving each other just enough room on the racetrack as they get real tight on the entrance of turn number 1. It looks like the 088 of Nosker in the middle line. He's trying real hard to stay there and not get shuffled out in the middle of the back stretch.
These drivers, they look rather steady when they're down these straightaways, being able to hold their line, but a lot of movement in the inside, middle, and outside line when they get into the entrance of the corner. Tim Novsker tried to tuck down behind the 616 of Jerm Lewis, couldn't do it. He's still stuck in the middle. Chris Elliott, the points leader, right behind him, along with Bernie Mobbs, as up at the front. Seminara, the pole sitter, has been able to work his way back to the front, but Garrett back on that outside line.
Garrett's trying real hard on that outside line right now, but the bottom line looking as fast as it has all day long, with the 8 of Jeffries and the 88 of Wesley tacked essentially to the back bumper of the 712 of Bob Seminara. Now it gets to about the 7th position. We're back to 3 wide again. Robbie Nice is to the outside of Jeff Crivello, who is on the outside of the 616 and 222 of Chris Emery. So these guys still trying to make things happen, but not a whole lot of real estate for passes to be made at this point into 3.
You just get the feeling something's got to give. It's amazing these drivers have been able to keep it together as long as they have, and now we do have a caution that is going to come out here as we are going to be closing in on 6 laps to go. Caution will fly for the 6th time here tonight. This group, though, gonna make it back to the start-finish line all in one piece. I think Seminara, half a car length, led them back to the line.
So officially right now, that time by 7 laps remaining. So we will absolutely have ourselves, at the very least, a green-white checkered finish. Bob Seminara was able to edge out the rest. Oh, we are going to have trouble in the back straightaway. Cy Jones facing the wrong way. And it looks like the 6 of Wiley Coat caught up as well. That could have been a lot worse than that, as cars scattered in the middle of the backstretch.
Well, no surprise that we ended up having a wreck touch off there, because we had 31 cars separated by, get this, only a 2.5 seconds. That is really close for that many cars, and how they were able to keep it together for as long as they did, I'm not sure, but my hat is off to every single one of those drivers for keeping it as clean and green as they did. We'll go back and see what brought out this caution to set us up for what's going to be, I think, a doozy of a shootout.
Man, that could have been a lot worse than what it was, but what a finish this is going to set up for us. Now, Seth, first place across the line was the 712 of Seminara. 4th place across the line, the 24 of Joe DeSpirito. So now, what does this set up for us on a restart? Do you believe Seminara will start on that inside line, or do you think that he goes up and tries to get a little love from his teammate in form of the number 24 DeSpirito?
Well, I think it's kind of a sticky situation for Bob Seminara in terms of his choice, because I think that deep down, he would love to be up there on the top side and have the 24 work with him because they work together week after week. But you then give up on the bottom the duo of Donnie Garrett and Grant Wesley, who we have seen work all race long. So it's a question of, do you want to have your own alliance or do you want to break up an alliance that has been working so far?
Well, and if you look at that car that's running in the 5th place right now, not only is that going to be a duel of Garrett and Wesley, because you can absolutely bet your bottom dollar Jeremy Jeffries is going to super glue himself to the back bumper of that number 88 car to try to help that 77 car out, assuming the 712 of Seminara does start up top. However, I think if you're Seminara, you've also got to look at, hey, I could start with the 88 and the 8 behind me, so I might have to leave my teammate hanging here. So that's a hard decision to make.
It definitely is. And I mean, we saw last season when Bob Seminara had already locked himself in through a win, and it looked like Joe DeSpirito was easily going to lock himself in on points. He didn't even win a race until we got to the playoffs. But those two, they worked together with their buddy Bernie Moms to get him a win, to be able to get him locked into the playoffs. Well, every single one of them right now have a 0 in the win column. So I'm not really sure there's any, I'll work with you, you work with me. I think it's to try and figure out which one of these Florida boys is going to get their first win of the season.
Oh, and you absolutely know how badly Joe DeSpirito wants it. One of the more memorable quotes last season, I would give up all of these pole positions to get into victory lane, which he was able to do finally 3 times, I believe it was, throughout the playoffs at the end of season number 51. So I don't know. I'm not exactly sure how politics are going to play into this, but it's definitely going to set us up for an excellent race finish here.
Not sure what happened 5 laps ago, but Andrew Miller in the 47 called it a day and will finish in 33rd. Looks like the only 3 drivers that were involved in that wreck over in turn 3, Mike Rogers, Mark Paglia, and Wayne Pribb now, but I think they'll all be able to continue. So 32 drivers will still be in the running for this race, and if we get the 1 to green signal this time around,
which I believe we will.
It'll be what, 4 laps to go, I do believe, when we go back green. No, 5 laps to go. No, it will be 4.
I believe so, and I believe the lights will turn out this time by. Oh, I was mistaken. Definitely next time by, though, Seth. We have no cars at this point that are a lap down, so with the way that the NASCAR 2003 system works at a super speedway, you get a significant increase in the time between you go yellow and back to green again, because they shave off a lap for any cars that are a lap down, which we have none at this point. So I believe, to your point, Seth, we are probably going to have a 3-lap shootout to the end of this race.
And that means that when we enter into that point and the green flag waves, the next flag will end the race. Right now, up at the front, we've got our 2 lap leaders. Seminara has led 30. Grant Wesley has led 23. But they've got that 77 of Donnie Garrett right there in the middle of them in second place. Joe DeSpirito will be 4th. Jeremy Jeffries in 5th. How about Dave Melson in the 038? We kind of talked about him as he was making some moves early, but really haven't talked about him since then. He's going to be up in 6th for the restart. Chris Emery right now in 7th. Then it will be Jeff Crivello, Jerm Lewis, and Robbie Nices completing the top 10. And we still got some of those drivers just outside of the top 10 there. Nofsker 11th, McLaurin 12th, Shelton 13th, Chris Elliott 14th, and Dave Cannon in 15th that we know they're going to be factors before this race is over.
And I want to just give a quick little shout out to the number 54 car of Robbie Nices, who has very quietly, Seth, had a very good day today. He's been in the top 10, top 15 most of the day, currently still running in that 10th position. And I noticed he was slicing and dicing right up there with those leaders when they were 3 and 4 wide. So got to give him his props. Having a real good day today is that number 54.
In my opinion, Robbie Nices was in the toughest situation of the entire race. When he was in the 3rd lane and Dave Cannon, Hank Middleton were making it 4 wide up above him, he had to not only hold his line with 2 rows beneath him, but then give room to that 4th line. So he was 3rd car in the middle of a 4 wide situation. So yeah, to your point, he has been doing a tremendous job here today. And Robbie Nices coming into this race currently finds himself mired in the point standings, currently scored in, I believe, the 22nd position in points, but He gained 7 spots last week. If he can keep climbing up there through the points with consistent runs, he could be a driver we'll be talking about when it comes around playoff time.
And that's a real feel-good story right there for Robbie. We've talked to Robbie in the past, and he's told us how every week he's just coming out here and trying to learn as much as he can from all of his competitors. For as good as everybody on the racetrack is, he wants to absorb as much information from those guys as he can and just put together a solid string of runs, and that's exactly what he's been doing. So, again, big props to him. Seth, about a half a lap until we go back green flag race, and I think it's time to take a little bit of a breath, because I think in these last 3 laps we're not going to have much time to breathe at all.
I think you're absolutely right. We have seen them 3 and 4 wide racing on these last 2 restarts. The checkered flag wasn't on the line then. That was just to get yourself positioned for when we get down to the final few laps. Now it is go time, because if a caution comes out, it's race back to the caution. Race will be over. If we make it to the white flag, which we have managed to do in the past 2 races, it's going to be first one back to that start finish line. You bring home the trophy, or you bring home the steering wheel. And we saw it really all about positioning last week with where you were at the time of that wreck off of turn 4. Might be the same scenario again this week.
Absolutely, because where you went into turn 3 made no difference if you were involved in that crash that happened off of turn 4 and down to the start finish line. So I think guys probably got to keep that in the back of their mind, but at the same time, everybody wants to go out there and clinch one of those playoff berths. You've got some guys at the front of the pack that are really hungry to do so. Look at that 77 of Garrett. Look at the 8 of Jeffries, guys who were not able to make the playoffs last season. Jeffries able to get a win, but 77 not so much. So out of the tri-oval across the line, the pace car is going to park it. The flagger with the green flag in his hand. 3 laps remaining off into Talladega. Garrett looks to have just a little bit of a better restart on that high line as they're side by side heading off into turn number 1.
But it looked like the 7, 12, and 88 were lined up better nose to tail. There was a gap between Garrett and Despirito on that top side, and you see the end result. Seminara out to the front, clear. Will he stay down with Grant Wesley? He will. Thought he might jump up there with that second lane, but instead, he's going to lead the train of Grant Wesley, Jeremy Jeffries, Chris Emery, and Jerm Lewis.
Heading off into turn number 3. Now the 88, who is the second position car, he's going to get clear of the 77 of Garrett. So now side by side is the 8 of Jeffries and the 77 of Garrett. Now only 4 cars on that outside line, 3 cars in the lead draft. It looks like the 8 of Jeffries has about a car length over the 222 of Emery across the line. 2 to go this time by. Still not much of a challenge at the front. Seminara now slides down in front of the 88 of Wesley, and it looks like those guys, they're going to continue running bumper to bumper, and I just don't know. I think the Seminara machine probably would have liked to have picked up that 24 car, but those cars behind him were just having none of it.
I think right now we saw a lot of times drivers wanting that middle line, that outside line, whatever the case may be, with the side-by-side racing as the preferred lane. I think for Seminara right now, he's going to be a bottom feeder. He wants to hug that yellow line. If they get a run on him on that top side, I'm sure he'll jump up there. But for now, he wants to make sure that 88 isn't going to be able to make a move to his inside.
And that top line, they are grouping up just a little bit more. It looks like Garrett now getting to the right rear quarter panel of the 88 of Wesley out of the tri-oval. White flag. Bernie Mobbs was down under the apron. He saved it. Now the Seminara car still with a clear advantage over the 88 of Wesley. Garrett trying his hardest to fight back in that middle line, but that bottom line looking as fast as it has all day, coming off of turn number 2.
Wesley, for a brief moment, was clear of the 77 of Garrett, but I think Garrett's back to his right rear quarter panel, so that boxes the 88 in. Look at the push to Despirito's giving to Garrett down the back straightaway. 77 and 712, they'll be side by side through 3 and 4.
Garrett Wesley in the number 88 washes up almost into the left side of Garrett. That's going to kill both of their momentums now. Still clean and green off of 4 as they work their way into the tri-oval. It looks like Despirito going to try real hard to get to the back bumper of 77 of Garrett.
Garrett trying to get up there, but he's not going to be able to get alongside of Bob Seminara, who's going to win the 3rd race of the season. He'll go coast to coast here, pole to win at Talladega.
Do got a little bit of action as they head off into turn number 1, but this race is going to be official. They were able to bring it home clean and green. Grant Wesley being able to help the 712 of Seminara. You see the 24 giving a shot to the side of his teammate Seminara right there. Seminara, no stranger to victory lane here at Talladega Super Speedway, is going to get his first win of the season in week number 3.
Bob Seminara was a 2-time winner last year, took part in the Final Four for the championship in the season finale, and has just added his name to the list of Josh Metallic and Billy Elliser as one that will be in this season's playoffs as well. I'm going to be honest with you, Zach. I thought Garrett had a chance there out of 4 because Seminara ran so low to block Wesley, and Wesley ran so low to try and get a run to the inside of Seminara. Both of them had their left sides clip the apron coming off the final corner. I thought that might lose them enough momentum. Garrett was going to be able to make a charge.
Yeah, I just don't think Garrett had the help in the form of the 24 that he needed behind him, because off of turn 4 all the way to the tri-oval, the 24 was not able to get to the back bumper of the 77 car, which, you know, I don't think it was any sort of team orders or anything like that given out or anything like that. But when you've got a choice of, you know, can your teammate pull it off, or are you going to push another car past your teammate to victory lane? Joe DeSpirito just wasn't able to give that push to the 77 of Garrett that he probably would have liked. So that was extremely advantageous for the 712 of Seminara.
Seminara ended up taking his first checkered flag last season in race 3. He does it again 1 season later, race 3 of season 52, as he just finished up his burnouts here in front of these Talladega, Alabama fans. And we take a look at the finishing results from this race, and no surprises up here inside of the top 5. Seminara, Wesley, Jeffries, Garrett, and DeSpirito. We see them up there towards the top of the leaderboard, it seems, every single week. But how about some of these guys in the latter half of the top 10? Chris Emery going to finish the day out in 6th position, and Chris Emery coming into this race as well, if I'm not mistaken, is just outside the top 10 in points in 13th. So this may move him into the top 10. Dave Melson in 7th. Jerm Lewis there in 8th, and then Jeff Crivello and Robbie Nisus. They're going to round out the top 10.
Absolutely. Those guys doing an outstanding job keeping themselves in contention at the end of the race there. And I think we saw a pretty good race overall there. The fact that we were able to make it back to the checkered flag alone was an extreme positive without any major incident. I think we got most of that stuff out of our system early on in the day. Now, Tim Nofsker, he brought home that 11th position, so he's going to get himself off that one in park list for next week, so he may be able to drive a little bit more aggressively than he was able to tonight. Chuck McClure, Bobby Farrell, David Cannon, Jessica Shelton, able to rebound after that incident on the back straightaway for a 15th place finish.
And then if you look down here outside of the top 20, there's some names that were up there inside of the top 10 in points that did not get the finishes that they were looking for. One of them, the points leader, Chris Elliott. I'm not sure what happened to him on that last restart. I didn't really see him get involved in any wreck where it would have looked like he would have sustained damage that would have had him off the pace, but he finished 10 seconds behind the lead pack in 30th position. That's going to hurt him points-wise. And, of course, as well, Hank Middleton DNFing in 34th. These are 2 drivers that came into this race, points leader and 3rd.
Yeah, and that just shows you how quickly things can change, and it's something that we've spoken about over the first 2 races of the season with the size of the fields that we're having. When you find yourself at the bottom of the standings at the end of the race, man, that is a huge hit to your points. So both Chris Elliott, who was involved in an incident in turns number 1 and 2, right after that green flag came out, not sure if there was any contact with any of the cars around him, but I did see that car shoot hard up and into the wall in the middle of 1 and 2. He was able to keep it clean and green to avoid bringing out a yellow flag, but I believe that may have had something to do with being 10 seconds back at the end of the race here tonight.
Tough break there for Chris Elliott, who had back-to-back top 5s coming into this race starting out the season. But great performances for some of these guys up inside of the top 3, and we're going to talk with them now. Let's kick things off with our 3rd place finisher, Jeremy Jeffries. Hey, Jeremy, it's Zach and Seth up here in the Flatout Racing Network studios. You got us?
I do. Hey, guys.
Well, man, I mean, when we talked to you last season after being in victory lane, you weren't able to make it into the playoffs because you weren't high enough in the point standings. Last week, solid outing, able to finish inside of the top 15, and you jumped up in the point stands as a result, 14th in points coming into this race. Third place here tonight. This will undoubtedly move you into the top 10. So is it feeling like the momentum's moving in the right direction for we to be able to find that 8 machine in victory lane soon again?
I'll tell you what, I think I've had 3 really good races this season. Just last week, we had a big wreck on the last lap that kind of took me out of things. So I feel like the momentum's been there. I just, it was nice to finish one out, get top 3 here.
We saw you guys 3 wide and 4 wide at certain points of this race, and no different there in that final 3-lap shootout. We saw side by side and from the lead all the way back through the field. Were you kind of boxed in there and just basically committed to pushing that inside line, or did you see any opportunity to maybe be able to either shoot up the middle or maybe find a lane down in the bottom to make things interesting, maybe be able to pick up this win for yourself?
I think I was pretty much boxed in on that last restart. I was just there to push the 712 and the 88. That's all I could do there. But I spent a lot of the race down on that bottom, just trying it out, seeing what I could do and what I couldn't do. And there at the end of the race, it was nice to have some experience down there.
Hey, Jeremy, it's Zach. It's good to talk to you. Congratulations on your 3rd place finish here tonight. Now, you did just mention that you spent a lot of time experimenting with that bottom and the top. So I have to ask you, were you surprised at all with the relatively lack of movement between that extreme bottom line and that upper line throughout the first, I would say probably half to 3/4 of that race?
Actually, I was. It seemed like every line except, the middle is always the best line, but the outside lane and the bottom lane just seemed to be just pretty mediocre. I was experiencing that, and I was like, wow, this is different.
And the other thing that we noticed, you were able to bounce back. Again, we can't reiterate enough. You finished 3rd, but you had that really scary incident earlier in the race where I believe it was the 55 may have missed that shift into 4th gear. How scary is that when you're about the halfway point of the pack and next thing you know, you have a car in front of you that's not stopping, but it's definitely not picking up speed the way that it is, and your reaction time on that being as little as it is?
Oh, yeah, I was committed. It was the 60 car. Believe me, I had a good view of that car. The 60 car actually blew 4th gear when I was trying to push him. And of course, he lost momentum as I was touching him. And I felt really bad about that because I think it ended up taking out the 710 also with him. But, I mean, those instances, are not much you can do.
All right, man. Well, again, it's awesome to see you get a good podium finish tonight as you work your way, trying to get your way into the playoffs as opposed to what kind of happened to you where you spent the few weeks that you were able to race trying to play catch up last season. So what do you got for us as far as thank you, shout outs, or sponsors?
First off, I debuted a new Chime Banking Chevrolet tonight, so I'm out of the Ford, no Doritos tonight, and it seemed to work out. I think I'll keep it. Thank you all. For doing the broadcasting. It's just awesome racing, and it's great to televise it and to get people to see the talent that's in this series. And thanks to all the owners and admins at RTG for allowing me to come in here and do this every week. It's a lot of fun.
That's Jeremy Jeffries. He finished 7th in the season opener. Last week, he ended up finishing in the... just lost his name here, but I believe he finished inside of the top 15 last week, and he finishes 3rd place here tonight. Going to put him in a good position points-wise heading into race 4 next week. Congratulations on a great run there, Jeremy.
Thanks, guys.
And let's now get our runner-up finisher, the driver of the 88, Grant Wesley. Hey, Grant, it's Zach and Seth up here in the Flatout Racing Network studios. You got us?
Yes, I do.
Man, season opener, you led 16 laps, but you ended up finishing in the 8th position. Last week, you're leading coming off of turn 4. You get hooked. You end up finishing in 10th place. There's still good finishes, but here tonight as well, a runner-up finish. It just seems like we see that 88 up there looking like it's one of the favorites to win the race, but then the last lap happens and you end up coming up just short. I mean, what little more do you think you needed to be able to get that 712 here to get this victory tonight?
Oh man, I'm really happy with the 2nd place finish tonight. Those first 2 races were kind of rough for me. Honestly, the first couple races, with the pressure to get those wins for those extra points in the playoffs is so high. I was wanting to knock off a win early again, like I did last season and the season before that. And the first race, I was running up front, had a good race going, and I sped on pit road, which is something I don't really do a whole lot. I was just trying to get that extra little bit, and I had to kind of do some extra work there. Got a bad finish on that one, and then last week, we were running up front, and we got the blocking, throwing a few blocks, and just tight racing up front. I hated to see the way that one ended, but once again, just kind of trying a little too hard, I think, early in the season, and so tonight I was just kind of trying to bide my time, play it safe. You notice there late in the race, I didn't move up to that middle lane. I was kind of looking at the F2. I figured that third line was going to come. I knew I had my teammate Jeremy Jeffries behind me, and I knew that the bottom was going to be the safest place for me to be. I was hoping there I could make a late move. That was also another thing I was wanting to do a little bit different. In the past, I've made my moves a little early, and I was kind of thinking maybe if things worked out, I'd be able to move up there coming off 4 or maybe going into 3 and try that middle lane to get around Bob. But, the opportunity didn't come. And like I said, I'm happy with the second this time.
The first time this season we saw a driver, and it was you, choose the outside line on a restart. Up to this point, every time the leader has chosen the inside line. I'm kind of curious too, because we've seen how the inside line does get the advantage through 1 and 2 and then can move up to that second groove. What was the strategy of starting up there on that top line for that restart late?
Yeah, as the race goes on, you kind of follow trends, how people's running, and you kind of make those calls on the fly. But, I was kind of positioning myself in front of my teammates there a little bit.
Hey, Grant, Zach, it's good to talk to you, man. Good to see you get that monkey off your back just a little bit, so to speak, overcome those humps and get yourself a solid second place finish. So the first thing that I want to ask you is, as you mentioned a little bit earlier when you were talking to Seth, you were able to score those 2 or 3 victories relatively early in season number 51, found yourself in a little bit of a rough position toward the end of the season, and now the beginning of this season being just a little bit rough for you as well, finally being able to get that breakthrough second place finish tonight. So the thing that I got to ask you when it comes down to all this, how does that change your mentality? How does that change your driving style, knowing that you're not as secure as what you were last season, going week to week and trying to lock yourself into the playoffs?
Yeah, consistency's always been my thing. I usually stay pretty consistent. So, I think I'm not really as worried about getting that win. With the way the playoffs are designed, I think it pays off almost more to be that point leader going into the playoffs. So, if I don't get a win and I'm able to stay consistent and maybe be the point leader going into the playoffs, I think I'd be happy with that.
And Grant, the other thing that I just asked Jeremy as well, were you kind of surprised to see the relative lack of movement between the top and bottom lanes tonight? That middle lane seemed to be pretty, the predominant fast lane up until you and Bob and Jeremy hooked up on that bottom line on the restart. Were you surprised at all to see that?
Kind of, and that's, like I said, you kind of follow trends and you kind of look at the F2 to see what cars are where. I kind of felt like, honestly, I thought Bob would move up to the middle there at the end, and I thought that middle lane may be the better place to be for a lap or two. But, last lap, I knew that somebody would come back down the hill, and I was kind of hoping for a top 3. Yeah, I was surprised to see Bob stay low, and I really, as strong as that bottom lane was, I was kind of surprised by that.
Well, definitely able to pull off that top 3, finishing in second place position. Excellent run here tonight. Thank you, sponsors, shout outs. What do you got for us?
Yeah, thanks to you guys for doing the broadcast. It makes it a lot of fun to kind of, have the story going and watch the playbacks. I'd like to thank everybody that watches, my friends and family out there. It's pretty awesome. I'd like to thank the owners here, Terry Ballman, Sean Prime, and David Cannon, the admins, Josh, Wiley, and Tim, everybody that helps out behind the scenes. My teammates at XFM, shout out to Jeremy Jeffries. He was up there. He helped me quite a bit. And Dave Melson, I worked with him, and Chuck early in the race. And thanks to my girlfriend, Brittany.
Well, that's Grant Wesley, not only second place finisher tonight, but going to be the points leader heading into next week's race at Talladega race number 4. Congratulations on a great run there, Grant, and we look forward to talking to you next week, maybe in Victory Lane.
Sounds like a plan to me.
And the driver that he holds the points lead over by 2 points heading next week is tonight's winner, 712 of Bob Seminaire. Let's go down to victory lane now. Hey, Bob, it's Zach and Seth up here in the Flatout Racing Network studios. You got us?
Yeah, what's up, boys?
Well, man, you probably had the toughest decision out there on the track in the closing stages of this race because you had your teammate in the 24 that you could have lined up with on that outside line, but instead you decided to take the bottom and hug that yellow line. But how much looking out the windshield did you do on that final lap, knowing that the 88 could maybe make a move or that 77 was getting a big push going down the back straightaway?
Oh, my neck was hurting. I was looking backwards. I know Grant probably could have jumped out. I was trying to straddle the lower lane there and fake high. I know, and 77 was right there. It was really tight, tough decisions, but I chose to stay on the bottom, and it worked out. I had to take the bottom on the start. I don't really like taking the outside on the restarts like that. The leader most times is better on the bottom, but it worked out.
You know, we ended up seeing you lead the early portions of this race after starting from the pole position, but then we saw you towards the back there on some pit strategy, and that's when they started going 3 and on occasion 4 wide, and you were right in the middle of that, having to cut your way back up through the front of the field. How nerve-wracking was that?
Yeah, that was pretty crazy. I mean, we were leading, and me, Joe, and a couple others, we pitted, and about 14 others stayed out on the track, so I lost my track position, topped off on fuel, was running in the back there with Jessica because she had that problem there. So we were taking our time coming up through the field, watching out for the big one, and we just turned up the wick. We started going, and it happened. You know, somebody didn't hold their line and wrecked her, but that was right behind me. But it was getting crazy back there.
So, Bob, we've seen you overcome quite a bit of adversity a number of times now, especially through, this season and the latter half of last season, where you would find yourself in positions where you would be stuck kind of at the tail end of the pack by no fault of your own. Unfortunately, tonight, the EOLL set you back. What is it? How do you find your comfort zone, knowing that at any point anything could break out around you or in front of you, and kind of, not get too shaken to the point that, okay, now I really need to focus. I need to make my way back up through the field again. What sort of things are you looking for out on the racetrack to try to keep that car clean and green?
Yeah, it's nerve-wracking. I mean, when you start up front, you just want to stay out of trouble, stay up there, and then something happens, whether it's warp or a bad pit or, the strategy, the way it worked out today. You're back there with, a different group of guys, and you got to run hard with them and try to figure out what they're doing. And it's fun to pass guys and work with different people to get back up there, but it doesn't always work out, but today it did, got position, a couple of quick cautions, helped. And, I had to make a couple of moves, but, sometimes it works out.
Absolutely. So coming off tonight's victory, you are going to find yourself second in points behind Grant Wesley. We know you did this early last season as well, where you were able to secure a victory and work your way into the playoffs. That way, getting that out of the way first. Now, moving forward, do you try to go and accumulate more points by getting more victories, or do you just try to be as consistent as you possibly can working toward the playoffs?
Well, the way we did I think we're going to do the points the way we did last year. So I am going to be running hard. I'm going to be trying to get those points because it does help you out in the seedings through the different stages of the playoffs. So, I'm going to be running hard like usual. I won race 3 last year, and I told Joe the other day I'm winning tonight. Reaffirmed that this morning. So it's done now. I'll be running hard. You got to get the points too. So we'll do it.
Right on, Bob. Congratulations again. What do you got for sponsors, shout outs, or thank yous?
I like to thank RTG, David and Sean and Terry, of course, and Josh and Wiley, all the admins here. This is just so awesome. I love, racing every Thursday. Look forward to it. FRN, you guys, this is really special. Shout out to my the D's up in work where I used to work. I retired now, but they're watching, and my bros up in New Fairfield, Connecticut, and Wayne and Dusty in New York. Man, it's awesome. I'd like to thank Mobs Motors, Joe and Bernie, and I got some help from Jessica tonight, as usual, and geez, I don't know. FTMF, APW. Yeah, buddy.
Well, Bob Seminara won race number 3 last season. Didn't have to wait long for his second win. He followed it up 2 weeks later in race 5. He called his shot tonight. Goes to victory lane in race 3 of season 52. Maybe we won't have to wait 2 weeks to talk to you in victory lane again, Bob. Maybe you'll be able to double down next week. But congrats on your victory here tonight. Go enjoy it.
Thank you, guys.
And as another race is in the books here, Zach, another name is added to the list. We now know that Josh Metallic, Billy Elliser, and Bob Seminara, they're going to be 3 of the 10 drivers to battle for the championship when the playoffs begin. But there's still so much of the space open for drivers to lock themselves in. There's still 7 races to go in the regular season as well.
Yeah, as you mentioned, 7 races to go, 3 different winners this so far. Now, when you look at the caliber of drivers that we have out here on the race on the track from week to week, I would say it wouldn't be too much of a stretch to think that we could potentially get even more different drivers. And how cool would that if all 10 weeks could be different winners leading up to the playoffs? Now, the likelihood of that happening, maybe not so much, but it's still within the realm of possibility. As we pretty much see the same names and faces contending for those race wins from week to week. Every once in a while, we get a surprise from somebody who, that usually does pretty well out there on the racetrack and puts themselves in a position to steal one of these victories from these big names. But so far, it's been exciting. We saw a little bit of everything tonight, Seth. We saw some blown motors. We saw some broken gears. We saw some big crashes. And we saw at the end of the race, 3 4-wide racing clean all the way to the checkered flag. So another good showing.
And I love the point that Bob Seminara made, too, when he answered one of your questions about the fact that, yes, there is that sense of security now that you're locked into the playoffs, but there's still so much on the line for him, Metallic, and Billy Elliser going down this stretch towards the playoffs, because not only are you trying to get yourself up there to the top of the point standings to carry those bonus points for the regular season championship into the playoffs, but where you finish of the 10 drivers that make it into the playoffs, it depends on that of how many bonus points in the seed you are placed that you're going to carry into the playoff system as well.
Absolutely. And we saw that last season. Joe DeSpirito wasn't able to secure himself a regular season victory all season long. However, he went into the playoffs with a huge lead, winning that regular season championship on top of all the rest of the bonus points that he had acquired throughout the season. Without the bonus points that he had throughout the season and the first couple rounds of the playoffs, he wouldn't have found himself in that final 4 in that championship, inevitably getting himself that championship. So being as absolutely consistent as you can and trying to find as much good luck as you can out there on the racetrack plays a really big factor.
And we have seen in the last 3 races, despite the fact that we've ended up having a caution come out at the end of last week's race, we still race back to the checkered flag. It's come down to that start-finish line on the final lap as to who's going to be going to victory lane, and it's going to be interesting to see how this carries into next week. We've, as you said, had quite a number of cautions and big wrecks in these races, but let's also bear in mind that we ended up running about 10 laps of 3 and 4 wide racing here tonight, and we're having fields of nearly 36, 37 cars every single week. There's not a whole lot of real estate out there on the racetrack at Talladega when you have that many cars in the field.
No, absolutely not. And we saw a lot of that tonight as we saw a lot of 3 and 4 wide racing, predominantly 2 cars sharing that middle line, which didn't leave very much room to the low or high side. But guys very skillfully able to maneuver their way with minimal incident when those things did take place. A lot of our incidents as a result of, cars checking up, accordion type incidents, broken gears, broken engines. So despite the fact for the second week in a row that we had a higher caution count again, Seth, I don't think those are things that we can rule out. A lot of real good, clean green racing still happening out on the racetrack.
And I have to think as well, with that being said, we saw a lot of our front runners in points here tonight get swept up into some incidents and subsequently lose spots in the standings. We saw Chris Elliott lose the points lead after tonight's race. And I think that's going to put some of the drivers that are up there in points this week, put them on pins and needles heading into next week's race at Talladega, one of the most unpredictable super speedways out there on the circuit. But that is going to do it for our coverage here tonight from Talladega, race number 3. Bob Seminara now joins Billy Elliser and Josh Metallic as a driver that will be battling for the championship in the postseason. Who will join them next week, or will we see our first repeat winner? We're going to have to wait and find out. But Zach, appreciate you joining me here tonight for another wild one at Talladega.
Absolutely, Seth. Thank you as always. Thank everybody behind the scenes at FRN. Really appreciate your guys' support. I had a little bit of a mini stroke there. Sorry about that. All the owners, admins, drivers at RTG, and of course you, the fans watching at home. Appreciate all of you. Can't wait to see you again next week for week number 4.
Absolutely. Green flag will be flying next Thursday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time as we make our way towards the midway portion of the regular season here, heading towards the playoffs for the Talladega Challenge. For Zach Freemel, I'm Seth Cole. Thanks for tuning in to our coverage here tonight of race number 3 of the RTG Talladega Challenge. We'll see you guys next week as you've been watching another broadcast courtesy of the Flatout Racing Network.